All right, so let's have some more conversations about Romans 1:20 and what atheists actually believe. Why? Because it's upsetting. Just get upset about it. And it's, I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm over the target. Why? Because, it produces blowback. So let's look at this logically. And if you're an atheist, 99 times out of 100, you believe in reason, you believe in logic. My belief should be predicated on the facts and rational understanding of something, correct? Okay, so there's no good reason on earth. If someone says to you, you do know God exists, you are just hiding the information from yourself. There's no good reason on earth why you should be getting upset about that by taking that person. There's none. 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 Why? It's not a personal thing. First of all, logically speaking, that is entirely within the realm of possibilities. There is such a thing in life, okay? And this gets into very, very complex territory where atheists try to simplify this in a way that distorts understanding. Start with this. Belief is not a choice. Yes, it is. Only in the rarest of circumstances is a belief not a choice. Okay, you see somebody get shot outside your window and you go, oh my God, call the cops. It's not a choice. Your direct sensory observation, 99 times out of 100, you're going to go with it completely and there's no choice involved. Okay, that's not what we're talking about when we talk about religious beliefs, and that's not what we talk about when we talk about atheism versus Christianity. We're talking about a complex chain of inferences. And as I pointed out, there is the logical predicate for your belief, which a lot of atheists pretend is the entire ball game, and it's a very small part of it. The logical predicate for your belief is probably 5 to 10% of what actually how you actually come to your beliefs. And there's the emotional resonance. The emotional resonance is everything. Some of this is politics, some of this is politics, some of this is politics. Sociocultural. Some of this is sociocultural, some of this is sociocultural, some of this is sociocultural. It doesn't quite have the same ring. It's actually probably more accurate, but it doesn't quite have the same ring. Some of this is sociocultural. The emotional resonance of your belief is far more important to how you actually formulate your beliefs and opinions on things than anything else. Consider the conservative and consider the liberal. They both live in the same world. They both have they both have the same available information. How they choose to steer themselves towards what relevant data becomes how they form their core identities. Not sure if I said that all that well, but you understand what I mean, correct? A liberal and a conservative both inhabit the same planet with the same facts available to them, basically. But then from there, they orient themselves differently towards what is speaking to them. What's actually motivating them. Not what are the facts. The facts are sometimes under dispute. And more important than the facts being under dispute is it's really easy to cherry pick these facts and cherry pick these facts. So I look at those facts and it tells a different story than when I look at those facts. And they're all facts. They're always usually facts. So your alter ego, if you're a liberal, your alter ego, the conservative, is usually dealing with facts too. He's just looking at different facts. Likewise, if you're a conservative, your alter ego, the liberal, is usually looking at facts too. They're just choosing which facts are more relevant. Why? Based on emotional reasoning. Based on emotional resonance. Both of the facts are usually correct. The factual predicates on both ends are usually correct unless you're dealing with, if you're dealing with normal people on both ends, the factual predicates are usually correct. They're just choosing to align they're choosing one set of facts as more relevant than another. And that's all choice, guys. That's all choice. Also consider this flat earther. He's available to him the same information that all the rest of us has. There is agency involved in what he is choosing to look at, period. And all of your core beliefs are aligned like that. Most of the time, if you are an atheist, you are choosing to do things that reinforce daily your non-belief. And you are doing them actively and often. Now, that doesn't mean you're right about there being a God, not being a God. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means there is choice involved in that. So to pretend otherwise is deceptive. Period. There's agency involved. Agency involved in everything that you believe, all of your core, really, really deeply, deep core convictions. There's agency involved. That's a fact. That's a fact. You have chosen a certain line of inquiry that got you to where you are. Only in the rarest of circumstances is that not true, and that's like something that immediately happens. You can't choose not to believe it. But that's not what we're talking about. So, here's the really important thing though, because the spaz attack is really the issue. The spaz attack is a tell. The spaz attack is a tell. If I say to you, if you say, I'm totally logical, Craig, I base my beliefs, just show me the facts. If you gave me evidence for your God, I believe you. And you say, I'm a logical person, I'm rational. That all makes sense to me. Until we start actually talking about spiritual things and you start having a cow for no reason. Why? That's the real question. That's the real question. It's a tell. And that tell isn't, I'm so confident in my position. So, let's look at, for example, going back to the Romans 1:20 idea. Now, it's a perfectly logical idea. I'm not saying it's right, wrong, true, false. I'm just saying it is perfectly logically consistent. That it is entirely possible that you might deep down your heart of hearts actually kind of know that there's a God and be hiding that information from yourself. People do behave like that all the freaking time. The fact that you rule that speculation off limits when it comes to yourself and have a cow about it is more of a tell that it's probably closer to true than you want to admit. Why? Because there's no good reason to be upset about it at all. That's a normal speculation. People speculate as to why I have my religious beliefs all the time. If you rule out that speculation is off limits from when you're talking about atheists, Craig, why? Because I can't handle it. Why can't you handle it? That's a more relevant question because a logical person, a rational person would handle it rationally. Makes perfect sense. Doesn't mean it's right, but it makes perfect logical sense. So you go, well, how would I know if I'm hiding the information from myself? Denial is a really big part of life, guys. Now, I'm not saying it's what's happening with atheists, but it's certainly possible. And if you're ruling it out of the realms of possibility, and then having a spaz attack if anybody brings it up, that should give you pause. Why? Because that's usually a sign of inauthenticity. And it happens really easily, okay? People can do that all the time, and not all the motivations are usually, the motivations, aren't necessarily nefarious. Let's think of a mother. A mother, she loves her 15-year-old kid. She finds something that she might be weed in his back pocket. She doesn't want to believe he's smoking weed. She kind of sort of suspects it, but she doesn't really allow herself to process the information. One day he comes home and he's glassy-eyed. She kind of sort of notices that he's glassy-eyed. She writes it, rationalizes the information away. Why? Because she doesn't really want to believe it. Duh! That's not possible that happens with atheists. That's not possible at all. Matter of fact, that seems potentially easily likely, and the fact that people have a cow when you say it makes it seem even more likely. Why? Because if that weren't, there's no reason to get upset about that speculation at all. It's not an emotional thing. You would just go, if you were actually being honest and searching yourself with integrity, go, yeah, that's possible that I'm hiding the information from myself because I just don't want to believe it, but how would I know? It's not accusing anybody of lying. You wouldn't necessarily know. Why? Because you're hiding the information from yourself. People do stuff like that all the time. Or not processing the information that you are getting rationally. Now there is evidence in the real world. When I say that the default position is Christianity, not Christianity, God, that's a given. People more often than not have thought that there was some sort of agency outside of ourselves throughout history. Atheism is relatively rare, talking world historical terms, completely rare. There's no such thing as atheist societies way back when. If there were, then you'd have a really good argument that atheist is some type of default position. But there aren't. So you have to accept that it looks to every single solitary, looks to the honest observer like some type of theist position is the default position. That doesn't mean theism is true. It just means our minds are more naturally inclined to believe that. And if you actually examine your own life, as an atheist, as an agnostic, I bet you $1,000, if I were doing an honest assessment, and you and I were in a room together for 3 hours, I could come up with 4 or 5 things that you actually may have even started going like, because I remember I did this when I was agnostic. I was technically agnostic, but I would do things all the time like, God, you got to get me out of this. God, you got to get me out of this one. Why? If you get me out of this, I promise I won't do it ever again. That's a common thing for a human being to do. Seems to be a natural inclination of the human mind. That's why there are so many religious beliefs and so many religious cultures and religious societies. It's really obvious that it's the default position, guys. Really obvious. Now, you can still try to make a case that there isn't a God, but you're going to have to take an honest accounting of that being what seems to be the default position. So one of the key arguments, and at least this argument is dispassionate in an actual argument, not just, I don't want to believe that that's true, but an actual argument is that, the best one, the best case scenario, the best one I've heard has something to do with, it's an evolutionary advantage for you to ascribe agency. So you see a tiger and you hear rustling in the woods, and you hear rustling in a bush, and it's better for you to ascribe some type of age, something going on. It's better for you to fill in the gaps. It's some type of survival mechanism, because if you start running and go, it's a tiger, and you run away, you'll live to tell the tale. Whereas if you want to go dispassionately observe and do research on what's making the noise of the pussy, you might get eaten. Now, that's not a slam dunk. It's just a decent argument. Because there's a lot of different ways that you could see that argument not necessarily being true. I mean, Pretty Polly, your mating partner, sees you run away like a wuss, and you're just like, where are you going, you stupid coward? And you might not actually be procreating at all. Like, oh, well, I was gonna hook up with him, but then I saw him, the bushes started rustling, and the coward ran the other way. I ain't procreating with that scaredy cat. I wouldn't procreate with that scaredy cat to save my life. I'm just saying there are other potential options for why we automatically seem to ascribe agency to things. But we automatically seem to do it. To pretend like we don't isn't an option, because it seems to be the case. That's why there are so many religions. And also, when you're talking about world religious cultures, okay, indoctrination doesn't solve the problem. Why? Because it's not an infinite regress, guys. Well, this guy was religious and he told his 2 friends, so they were religious and they told their 2 friends. Somewhere along the way, somebody had an original impulse. There's God. That's why there's so many religions. And people seem to naturally be inclined, when they're put in situations, to ascribe agency outside of themselves and to think and to, experience beings. And if you're an atheist, you say experience beings that aren't there. Well, you still have to account for the reason that it seems to be an almost completely normal part of being a human being. And prior to me being an actual committed Christian, okay, I used to have conversations that I've noticed in the past. And if you look at your own life, there are plenty of situations in your own life where you've had kismet experiences or synchronicity experiences. It's you, the practicing atheist. And what you've done now that you've committed to a position is you look back on those experiences, you rationalize them away. You go, that couldn't have been what I kind of thought it might have been at the time. First thing that happened when I became an actual committed Christian, I look back on my life and I said, that was probably God, that was probably God, that was probably God. And if you're a practicing atheist and you look back on your life now, you could probably go, if there is a God, that was God. If there is a God, that was God. If there is a God, that was God. Why you would have a cow about that, I don't know. There shouldn't be all this melodramatic. There shouldn't be all this melodrama involved with this. Really shouldn't. Some of you, a huge chunk of you say, if you show me the evidence, then I will believe dispassionately. I'm a neutral third-party observer who just wants to know what's true. But then when you start bringing up stuff like this, you start getting really, really defensive and really touchy. Why? Shouldn't. You shouldn't. Why? Because it's not all that melodramatic. I'm either right or wrong. God either exists or does not exist. The fact that that there's so much melodrama involved when people start actually trying to honestly assess it should be a tell to you. That's something else going on other than just finding the facts. The fact that you have a cow and can't really have a normal conversation when people start talking like this without getting all charged up and trying to shut somebody down should be a tell to you. What? You got a dog in the fight. You aren't to be trusted. You are not a neutral, dispassionate observer. You've got a dog in the fight, and that dog is strong, and that dog is not predicated on the facts. Period. Why? Because the facts don't warrant the emotional meltdowns at all. The facts aren't even close to warranting it. I'm either right or wrong, but nothing I should say should be setting off triggers. Period. Why? I'm not saying anything dramatic. I'm just speculating out loud about things. And normally when people have cows for no reason, it is a tell. And that tell is, let me throw myself and the other person off the track. Why? Because I don't want to know this. Consider the woman who's trying to hide the fact from her that her son is smoking weed. You think the kid's smoking weed. How careful would you have to be talking to her to try to get her to see that the kid smoke? You'd have to be really careful, right? Do you get it now? Now, let's consider somebody who's pretty darn certain their kid isn't smoking weed. If you were talking to that woman who's trying to hide from her, I'm just saying, observe the psychological realities, because this is the God's honest truth. Now, not every atheist is all this touchy. It's about 30 to 40%. As I point out, someone like Objectively Dan isn't. Someone like Shannon isn't. It's only a certain type of atheist that's all this touchy and you can't have normal, real conversations about God belief. Why? Because they start freaking out and trying to shut you down. Freaking out like crazy people. That's a tell. And that tell isn't, I'm so confident in my position. That tell is, don't say the wrong thing. That's an emotional resonance that has nothing to do with the facts of the matter. Because you should be able to dispassionately, without emotional melodrama, think clearly. I don't necessarily believe Craig, and then just think about what I'm saying without getting all worked up. Why? Because I'm not saying anything all that alarming unless you're trying to hide something from yourself. So, let's go back to the example I used of the woman who's trying to hide the weed. Remember, she's trying to hide the fact that a kid does weed from herself. You're talking to that woman, she's going to get touchy, isn't she? Start talking about drug use in kids. Why are you bringing up drug use in teenagers? Start acting like an atheist. Why are you bringing up drug use in teenagers, Craig? That's what she'd start doing. You'd have to be really careful talking to that woman. Do you see the picture that I'm painting, yes or no? Look, you still might be right that there isn't a God, but the fact that you get touchy about it shows that you're nowhere near as confident in your position as you think you are. Consider the woman who actually kind of suspects that her son is on weed. You got to walk on eggshells when you're talking to that woman about marijuana and her son. Why? Because you say the wrong thing, she's going to bite your head off. That bespeaks lack of confidence in what she'll insist to you. I know for a fact my son isn't doing weed, and she'll be lying through her teeth. She doesn't know she's lying necessarily. The tell is in how she responds to you. If you start poking around with her and start going, well, marijuana son, yeah! It's a tell that she isn't all that confident in her position. Well, welcome to reality, dogmatic atheists. It's a tell. What? That you aren't all that confident in your position. Why? Because I shouldn't be able to trigger you out at all. At all. Even a little. It's a tell. And the tell isn't, I'm really sure. The tell is, don't say the wrong thing, Greg. I'm going to fall apart. I swear to God, I'm telling you the truth. I swear to God, I'm telling you the truth, guys. Look, you still might be right. It's, don't get too stressed out about it. You don't have to become a believer. Whatever you think is going to dramatically harm you should you start to open the door a little and go, hey, maybe there is a God. Whatever mountain you think is going to fall on top of you, I'm not sure. But you do think that one is. Why? Because you shouldn't be getting upset at all. Now, consider someone who knows for a fact that their son isn't smoking weed, and they're pretty darn sure, 95% convinced, because they've never had any evidence of it. I start bringing up weed and marijuana. Are they going to get upset? No. I start bringing up weed and teenagers. You know, a lot of people are smoking weed these days. I go, not my son. Not my son, Craig. Oh, you sure about that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. how hard am I? I might still be able to upset them, but I have to work really hard at it. You understand? That's what I'm saying. Consider how when I was on like you can still upset me having conversations about religion and Christianity. It's possible to upset me. You got to work really hard at it. That's how I know when I'm dealing with the douchebag atheists. Why? Because they're working really hard at getting under my skin. Like really going out of their way. You don't have to work really hard to get under Aaron Ra's skin. You say one or two things and he starts foaming at the mouth. That's a tell, guys. That's a tell. Promise. That's how psychology works. If you're not defensive, you don't get defensive. Hello. Reality check 101. If you're not on the defense, you don't get defensive. Right now, I'm just speculating out loud. Now, it's possible you might be getting a little defensive because I'm a Christian, you don't know me, and I'm speculating in an uncomfortable territory for other reasons. But generally speaking, if you were getting triggered listening to this video, that's a tell that you're not all that confident in your position. Why? Because you shouldn't be falling apart. At all. Even a little. Confidence bespeaks confidence. People who are confident don't have emotional meltdowns. Period. Period. Never. You got to work to make them have an emotional meltdown. You got to work at it. You got to be deliberate. You got to know them and size them up and start trying to make them melt down. If you have a meltdown just listening to a video, just listen to, I can't believe 70 said this stupid thing again. Oh my God, 70 said the stupidest thing I've ever heard. That's a tell. Those freaks who go show up in her comment section and now they show up in her videos and make 50 comments. Yeah, you're really confident there isn't a God. That's why you have to say it 50 times, right? Sure. Who do you think you're fooling? Because you aren't fooling me, and maybe you're fooling yourself, but you shouldn't be. Why? Because it's really obvious. That's not how somebody who's confident acts, period. You got to go on record saying apropos of nothing. Make sure I don't believe your Sky Fairies nonsense, Craig, and blah, blah, blah. If you got to do that, that's not confidence in your position. It's not even close. That's not what confidence looks like. That's not what confidence sounds like. That's its opposite. That's its opposite. And nothing I'm saying shouldn't be obvious to you. Why? Because I'm telling you the God's honest truth. That's how life actually works, people. You know, again, go back to the woman who's trying to hide the fact that her son's on marijuana. She'd be defensive. She'd be preternaturally defensive like a certain type of atheist is. She'd be defensive every time she heard marijuana get brought up. Every time she heard, you know. Why? Because she has some deep-seated emotional reason for hiding the information from herself. Deep-seated that isn't being fully addressed. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going on in case of all atheists. But for a certain portion of them, absolutely. Why? Because they are not acting, their behavior does not correspond to the reality of what's being discussed. The trigger warnings are completely out of proportion to the offense being taken. Completely out of proportion. They don't correspond at all. Even a little. Aaron Robb acts like he's personally offended by people's other beliefs, no matter what. And he gets really, really, really foaming at the mouth in rage really quickly over them. Nobody's giving him any offense, so there's no reason for him to be acting like that. So having an emotional response by someone who says, I am rational first, having a completely irrational response that is inauthentic to the stimuli is a tell. And that tell is what's really going on here. What's really going on here, because it isn't what the person is saying. It's that simple, guys. What's really going on here, because it's not what the person's saying. And ultimately, if you want to find out what's really going on, you're going to have to guess. You're going to have to ascribe motivations, you're going to have to read between the lines, and you're going to have to size people up psychologically. Why? Because there's some form of psychological payoff that is not being vocalized. The emotional resonance of why he's acting like that is not being spoken. Doesn't correspond to the stimuli at all. There is a payoff. That's how humans work, guys. That's how human beings work. First of all, most people don't know what they actually believe. Reality check 101. Most people have no idea. They only have vaguely inchoate feelings about maybe I believe this, and most of their actual beliefs are taking place deep beneath the surface of their subconscious, deep within their psyche, and they're barely aware of them. Barely perceiving them at all. So they aren't logically structured and logically predicated on A equals A thinking. Again, the most important thing is usually deep-seated emotional resonance that isn't being vocalized. And for example, with Hawk Nelson, I started listening to some of his other deconversion testimony, another video. And there's, lo and behold, I found out that there was something more going on that he wasn't telling us, just as I guessed in some of my last videos. So I'll go into that in another video to come. He started talking about something that he didn't mention in any of his deconversions. He starts talking about these experiences that he had with people in the church, with this, some sort of faith movement, some sort of revival movement, to Toronto something, or maybe I'm going to say Toronto, but that could be wrong. And just as I was speculating that he wasn't telling us the full story, all of a sudden I'm in a video. I'm watching a deconversion testimony video where he feels a little safer. He starts being elaborating a little more. And I find out there's something else going on just as I suspected. That's deep, hidden from him, and really, really emotionally intense. Bang. 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 That's usually the story, guys. If you're I'm not saying that you're wrong. Okay? You can still have your little, I don't believe in God thing. I'm not trying to persuade you. All I'm trying to point out, and this is about 40% of the people in the atheist community, if you have a cow, if you're having emotional spasms that aren't related to the stimuli of what's being discussed, that's a tell. And that isn't a tell about, you just haven't been presented the evidence as you insist. That's a tell that you've got some deep-seated psychological thing going on that you're barely aware of yourself. In the case of Hawk Nelson, he started touching upon it himself. He started elaborating on it. It's something to do with his father was a preacher, and there was some sort of, big revival movement that came to town, and he thought it was all emotionalism, and then they turned on his dad, and it sounds like it sounds like exactly what I would expect to hear. Some sort of really, really complicated, confusing thing that happened when he was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. By ostensibly good religious types. Exactly what I was expecting to hear. Some sort of emotionally resonant reason why he is deconverting as opposed to deconstructing. Again, I've said this before, deconstruction makes complete sense. Deconversion doesn't necessarily follow. Deconversion is less than this doesn't quite add up. It is a conscious rejection. It is a step further. It is I consciously reject this, not I don't understand how this all lines up. I don't understand how this all lines up makes sense. That's called life. Deconversion is a step further. It's I consciously reject this. I want this out of my life. I want this out of America. It's an emotional thing. And it's a deep-seated one. And it has nothing to do with just the facts. Or at least just the surface facts that we talk about. Nothing to do with it. So, I think that was clear. Pretty sure that was pretty clear, so I'm going to let it stand as it was. Again, there's a reason why I just plug in and go. Because I get at things that I wouldn't otherwise get at. So, there you have it, kids. Tirade number 56. Tirade number 56. Ranting and raving yet again about people's religious beliefs. That is all for now. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.